"Mom, there's a man pointing a gun at me." I heard my daughter's voice, calm, almost unnervingly so, through the phone. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll handle it. But you might want to come home now, before this guy becomes the evening news." I didn't even grab my purse. I bolted from the conference room, leaving behind my stunned colleagues. We'd moved into this neighborhood just 2 weeks ago. Who could have guessed the welcome party would involve a gun in my daughter's face? They picked the wrong house. More importantly, they had no idea who she was. If you're watching this and living your own HOA nightmare, drop a comment below. Tell me the most ridiculous rule they've tried to enforce on you. I never pictured myself in this kind of situation. After 20 years of marriage, an unexpectedly peaceful divorce, and finally buying my dream home in Oakwood Estates, I thought I was walking into a new chapter filled with quiet mornings and friendly neighbors. That's what the brochure promised. A peaceful, well-maintained community where neighbors become family. What it should have said was, petty dictatorship, where your property isn't really yours, and armed wannabe cops might threaten your loved ones. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind. My name is Sarah Mitchell, 45, consumer rights attorney in Chicago. After my divorce was finalized, I wanted a clean slate, a beautiful, secure neighborhood with charm. Oakwood Estates checked every box. Colonial-style houses, manicured lawns, smiling neighbors during the open house. The realtor mentioned there was an active homeowners association. I didn't think twice. I'd lived with HOA rules before. How bad could it be? Spoiler, much, much worse than I imagined. On my first official day as a homeowner, I was unpacking when the doorbell rang. Standing there was a nervous woman in her early 50s clutching a thick binder. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Karen Wilson, HOA secretary. This is your welcome package and rulebook. Please review it immediately to avoid incidents." The way she said incidents made it sound like breaking. A rule might earn you public humiliation. I thanked her, took the binder, and noticed how she glanced over her shoulder before hurrying to her car. Odd. I figured she was just socially awkward. Later that night, I flipped through the rule book. My attorney instincts kicked in instantly. The pages were full of legally questionable rules. No street parking between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., even for guests. No gatherings over 8 people without prior HOA approval. Mandatory attendance at quarterly meetings. Fines starting at $50, doubling with each repeat violation. But the crown jewel of absurdity? The HOA board reserves the right to enter properties with 24 hours. Notice to inspect for compliance. That was flat out illegal, a blatant violation of property rights. I mentally bookmarked the worst offenders to bring up at the next meeting. For now, I put the binder away and went back to making my house a home. A week later, my daughter Jessica arrived for a 2-week stay. At 32, she was everything I admired. Sharp, steady, and unshakable. What nobody in Oakwood Estates knew, including our new neighbors, was that Jessica was an FBI tactical team commander with a decade of high-stress field experience. She never advertised her work, preferring to tell people she was a government employee and leave it at that. I was thrilled to have her home. I'd missed her terribly since she'd been stationed at the D.C. office, and I wanted her input on some home security upgrades I'd been planning. The morning after she arrived, we were enjoying coffee on the front porch when an elderly woman from next door shuffled over. "You must be Sarah's daughter. I'm Linda Thompson, the neighborhood's resident gossip," she said with a grin, extending her hand to Jessica. "According to our illustrious HOA president," Linda chuckled warmly. "Welcome to our little kingdom. Careful not to break any of the royal decrees, or you'll meet our self-appointed security chief, Doug. He thinks the badge he bought online makes him sheriff of Oakwood County." She leaned in, eyes twinkling conspiratorially. "And keep an eye out for Richard Connors, our HOA president, ex-cop, retired early, supposedly after a scandal. Word is his buddies helped him dodge charges. Now he runs this place like his personal fiefdom, with Doug as his loyal guard dog." That afternoon, Jessica helped me unpack the last of the boxes while I told her about the absurd HOA rules. "Sounds like classic control issues," she said, arranging my books with precision. "I've seen it before. Small power, small territory, big ego. Usually just irritating, not dangerous." She'd soon learn how wrong that assumption was. That evening, I parked my car in my driveway, apparently 2 inches over the designated space line. a line barely visible under the dim street lamp. The next morning, a glaring orange slip was tucked under my wiper. Violation, improper parking. Fine, $50, payable within 7 days to avoid additional penalties. This is absurd, I muttered over breakfast, waving the notice at Jessica. 2 inches over an invisible line? She studied the slip, her trained eye catching something I hadn't. Mom, look at the signature, D. Peterson. Security enforcement? That's not HOA board. Is that even a real position? I was already drafting an email to the HOA, citing state laws on reasonable enforcement of covenants. As an attorney, I couldn't let this slide, not for myself, but on principle. Small abuses of power, left unchecked, only grow. Less than 30 minutes after hitting send, my phone rang. A local number. Mrs. Mitchell? Richard Connors, Oakwood Estates HOA president. His voice was deep, overly polite, but with an edge of irritation. I received your concerns about our parking enforcement. Perhaps as a newcomer, you don't understand how we operate. We maintain property values through strict adherence to the rules. Everyone follows them, no exceptions. I suggest you pay the fine and adjust your attitude. Before I could respond with the legal precedents I'd already cued in my head, his tone hardened. Oakwood Estates might not be the right fit for people who can't follow simple rules. Things tend to get uncomfortable for troublemakers. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air before he added, the next HOA meeting is tomorrow evening. Attendance is mandatory. 7 p.m. sharp, at the community center. He hung up before I could get another word in. That evening, Jessica and I were going over strategies for the upcoming meeting when a strange noise outside caught her attention. She was at the window in seconds. Mom, you need to see this. I joined her just in time to spot a heavy-set man in what looked like a security uniform, spraying a giant red X on our front lawn. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted, rushing to the door. The man turned slowly, deliberately, finishing his vandalism before facing me. Official HOA warning, ma'am. This property has received multiple compliance notices. Multiple? We'd gotten exactly 1 this morning. This is your final warning before further action. He tapped the holster on his belt, not subtly, before walking off toward a car parked across the street. I was furious, but Jessica's expression was calm, almost amused. Did he just imply he'd use a weapon over a parking violation? She asked quietly, snapping photos of the lawn. Mom, I think I'll stick around a while longer. This just got interesting. There was something in her tone, no fear, just the calculated curiosity of someone who'd found a puzzle she knew how to solve. I don't know what that red X means, I said, but I'm guessing we've just been marked as troublemakers. Jessica's small, confident smile was unsettling. No, Mom, they've just marked themselves as the kind of bullies who don't realize they've picked the wrong target. The next evening, we arrived at the community center for the HOA meeting. About 40 residents were already seated in rows of folding chairs. Richard Connors, a tall man with silver hair and the rigid posture of someone who enjoyed authority, stood at the front, with Doug, the lawn vandal from yesterday, hovering nearby. Karen Wilson sat behind a small table with meeting minutes and financial reports, carefully avoiding my gaze as we entered. Conversations hushed, eyes followed us, and then Richard called the meeting to order. Before we begin, let's welcome our newest resident, Sarah Mitchell. All eyes turned to me. Mrs. Mitchell has already demonstrated her unique perspective on our community standards. A few nervous chuckles, mostly silence. For the next 45 minutes, I watched in horrified fascination as Richard and Doug ran the meeting like petty dictators. Residents asking about inflated landscaping costs were shut down with vague talk of necessary improvements. When Michael Garcia, whom I'd later learn was a long-time resident, questioned why security expenses had tripled in 6 months, Richard cut him off. We've discussed this before, Michael. Increased security is non-negotiable, given recent regional incidents. No details, no transparency, just control. Specifics were offered and Michael was not allowed to follow. Up, I observed residents exchanging glances, but remaining silent, the atmosphere of intimidation was palpable. When the financial report concluded, I raised my hand. Richard pointedly looked elsewhere until no other hands remained. Yes, Mrs. Mitchell, he finally acknowledged, not bothering to hide his annoyance. I have several Questions about the legal basis for some of your enforcement protocols. I began, my voice steady. Particularly the provision allowing HOA representatives to enter private property for compliance. Inspections that directly contradicts state property laws unless specific. Consent is established in the original. Deed. A tense silence fell over the room. Additionally, your fine structure exceeds what's permissible under state statutes governing homeowners, associations, specifically Code 2745.3. Richard's face flushed, his knuckles whitening around. The podium, Mrs. Mitchell, we appreciate your legal opinions. However, our covenant was established with guidance from top HOA attorneys. These matters were settled long before you arrived. His smile didn't reach his eyes. If you'd spend as much time reading the welcome package as you did trying to find loopholes, you'd understand that by purchasing an Oakquit Estates, you've already consented to our governance structure. Perhaps in your next home, you'll do more thorough research before buying. The dismissive tone was meant to humiliate, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but years of courtroom experience had taught me to never show when an opponent had landed a blow. As the meeting concluded, I noticed Karen slipping a folded note into my hand as I passed her table outside the community center. I unfolded it. Careful cameras and microphones in common areas. They're watching. Before I could process this warning, Doug deliberately bumped into me, nearly knocking me off balance. We know how to handle people like you, he muttered just loudly enough for me to hear. Ask the Johnsons why they sold so quickly last year. With that, he walked to his car, the same one that had been parked outside our house the night before. When I returned home, I found Jessica in animated conversation with Linda Thompson and a man I didn't recognize in our living room. Mom, Jessica said, her eyes bright with excitement. I think we found a small army to fight the neighborhood tyrant, she introduced. Michael Garcia, the same man who had asked about security expenses at the meeting. Michael has some very interesting security footage you need to see. Before she could elaborate, my phone chimed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Serious violation, $5,000 fine sent from Richard Connor's HOA email address. Unauthorized gathering," I read aloud. From my phone, "This is absurd. They're claiming having guests in our own home violates HOA rules." Michael nodded. Grimly, they pulled the same thing with me last month when I hosted my brother's family, called it an unregistered event, exceeding occupancy guidelines. The real issue was that I'd been asking questions about their financial reports. This is how they operate. Find any excuse to pressure people who don't fall in line. Linda sipped her tea, nodding in agreement. They've been doing this for years. Most people just pay the fines to avoid conflict. Those who fight back suddenly find themselves with broken windows that neighborhood kids must have caused, or plumbing issues that mysteriously affect only their homes. She leaned forward. But the Mitchells aren't most people, are they? Jessica grinned, determined expression I hadn't seen since she took down a notorious fraud ring 3 years ago. Michael has been documenting Richard and Doug's activities for months. Show her, Michael. He opened his laptop and played a series of video clips from his home security system. Richard and Doug accepting cash from a construction contractor working on a house without proper permits. Doug placing violation notices only on homes of residents who had questioned the board. And most disturbing, Richard and a man in a business suit examining houses while referencing a list including mine. They've got a blacklist, Michael explained, homes they want to target because the locations are prime for redevelopment once the new commercial zone is approved across the highway. Linda pulled a small notebook from her purse. I'm a retired investigative journalist. Old habits die hard. I've been keeping records of every suspicious activity since Richard took over the HOA 3 years ago. 26 families have been forced out through harassment, selective enforcement, and in some cases what I'd call outright intimidation. The homes are always purchased by shell companies that trace back to Richard's brother-in-law's real estate investment firm. They're buying low from harassed homeowners and sitting on properties until the reasoning goes through. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just petty power abuse, it was a calculated real estate scheme. So they're not just neighborhood tyrants, they're real estate predators, I said, feeling the familiar fire that ignited whenever I encountered systematic injustice as a consumer rights attorney. I'd seen countless schemes to defraud ordinary people, but this one struck a deeper chord. It was happening in my own home to my own neighbors. They found a way to weaponize the HOA structure to systematically force out targeted homeowners for profit. Jessica was studying Michael's footage with the intense focus I'd seen her apply to complex FBI cases, her eyes narrowing as she spotted connections. Invisible to most people, look at their pattern. She pointed out, they escalate gradually, first minor violations with small fines, then increasingly absurd infractions with larger penalties, followed by maintenance issues that make life uncomfortable, and finally direct intimidation. She paused the footage on Richard's face, zooming in on his expression as he accepted cash from the contractor. That's not just greed, she observed quietly. That's the look of someone who enjoys the power. He's not just after money, he's getting psychological satisfaction from controlling people's lives? Linda nodded. Knowingly, that's exactly it. I've interviewed dozens of corrupt officials over my journalism career, and there's a certain type who's drawn to positions of petty authority precisely because they can inflict suffering with impunity. The HOA structure is perfect for them. Minimal oversight, broad enforcement powers, and a captive audience who literally can't escape without selling their homes. Michael added, my security system captured something else last week. Richard telling Doug which houses to target next. He specifically mentioned yours, Sarah saying you were going to be a problem he already had plans to squeeze you out before you even challenged him at the meeting. The thought that I had been targeted from the beginning sent a chill down my spine, followed quickly by righteous anger. These bullies had no idea who they were dealing with, a seasoned attorney and an FBI tactical commander who specialized in taking down organized criminals. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the City Housing Authority about the HOA's practices. By afternoon, our water was shut off emergency maintenance on your section of the line. Doug announced when I confronted him, not even trying to hide his smirk, should be back on in 6 hours or so. HOA regulations permit essential infrastructure. Maintenance at our discretion, maybe keep a few bottles of water handy next time you decide to file complaints. Jessica watched this exchange from the porch, her expression neutral but her eyes calculating. That evening, while I was on a conference call with colleagues, Jessica installed hidden security cameras around our property using equipment she'd borrowed from her FBI. Resources, just standard precautions. She assured me nothing that would compromise any investigation. That night, we noticed Doug's car parked across the street, occasionally shining a flashlight toward our windows. Intimidation tactics, Jessica explained unfazed. They're trying to make us uncomfortable, enough to either fall in line or move out. Classic bullying behavior, but legally ambiguous. Enough that if we called the regular police, they'd just say he's conducting neighborhood security. She was typing something on her phone as she spoke. Remember, Karen, the nervous HOA secretary. She just texted me once of what they did to her and others. While Jessica was meeting with Karen, I discovered a new line item on our HOA bill: enhanced security assessment. 200 Durza. When I called the HOA office to question this, I was told it was a special assessment approved by the board. Due to increased security concerns in the neighborhood, no such concerns had been mentioned at the meeting, nor had any vote for special assessments taken. Place I was preparing a formal legal response when Jessica returned from her meeting, her expression both troubled and determined. They're targeting your house specifically, she explained, showing me documents Karen had provided. Your lot is one of 5 that would complete a contiguous block of properties. Their investment group wants to control before the commercial rezoning application goes through. They've successfully pushed out 3 of the 5 homeowners already. You and the Garkas are the last holdouts. She pulled up a map on her laptop showing property ownership in our neighborhood, with nearly 30% of homes now owned by various LLC names that Karen had confirmed were all connected to Richard's brother-in-law. This isn't just HOA corruption. It's organized real estate fraud. They're manufacturing reasons to fine and harass targeted homeowners, driving down property values and forcing sales, all while Richard's family businesses profit. That evening, Jessica contacted her colleague, Agent Thomas Davis at the FBI, asking him to run background checks on Richard and Doug. While we waited for his response, I discovered my car had been vandalized. The words "comply or leave" spray painted across the driver's side. We documented everything, adding to our growing file of evidence. Agent Thomas called back the next day with disturbing information. Richard Connors was forced to resign from the police department after multiple excessive force complaints and an internal affairs investigation into evidence. Tampering charges were dropped under suspicious circumstances. Doug Peterson has no legitimate security credentials and his concealed carry permit was revoked 3 years ago for brandishing at a supermarket customer. Most concerning, there's an ongoing financial crimes investigation looking into money laundering through several HOAs in your county, including Oakwood Estates. Jessica had just ended the call when she received an urgent text from Michael. Emergency, Doug at my door. He has a gun. She was on her feet immediately. Car keys in hand. Stay here. Mom, call the local police, but tell them this is a potential armed standoff situation to ensure they take it seriously. I'm going over there before I could protest. She was out the door, moving with the focused efficiency I'd seen only when she was in full FBI mode. I could barely breathe as I made the call to police reporting an armed man threatening my neighbor. The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way, but mentioned they were short-staffed due to a multi-car accident on the highway. It could be 15 minutes. Before anyone arrived, 15 minutes is an eternity. When someone has a gun pointed at people you care about, I paced the living room, jumping at every sound, praying Jessica's training would keep her safe after what felt like hours, but was actually only 6 minutes. I couldn't stand the waiting. I grabbed my car keys and headed to Michael's house 3. Doors down. As I approached, I could see Doug standing on Michael's porch, one hand resting obviously on his holstered gun, the other pointing aggressively at Michael's security cameras. Jessica was already there, positioned between Michael and Doug, her stance casual, but her eyes intensely focused. I stayed back, not wanting to escalate the situation, but close enough to hear Doug's angry demands. Those cameras are a violation of HOA privacy standards. They're recording common areas without authorization. Take them down now or face fines of $100 per day, plus immediate removal at your expense. Michael stood his ground in his doorway. The cameras are on my property, recording my property. That's completely legal under state law. There are no HOA regulations that can override that. Doug's face flushed with anger. I'm not asking again. The HOA has determined these cameras violate Section 12 of the Covenant regarding surveillance of common areas. Jessica's voice cut through the tension, calm but authoritative. Sir, I've reviewed the Oakwood Estates Covenant thoroughly. Section 12 addresses landscape maintenance schedules, not security systems. There is no provision restricting homeowners from installing security cameras on their own property. Her precise knowledge of the regulations clearly caught Doug off guard. Who the hell are you? This doesn't concern you. Doug's hand moved closer to his holster. I'm Jessica Mitchell, a family friend staying with the Mitchells, and actually, this does concern me since you appear to be threatening a homeowner. Without legal authority, the situation escalated. Quickly after that, Doug, frustrated by Jessica's calm interference, pulled his gun, waving it between Jessica and Michael. You people don't understand how things work here. When security says take down the cameras, you take down the damn cameras instead of showing fear. Jessica glanced at the gun with an almost clinical interest only amateurs hold a gun like that, finger on the trigger. Already that's interesting. Her casual critique seemed to infuriate Doug further. You think this is a joke? I'll show you how serious I am. He raised the gun toward the sky and fired a shot, presumably meant to intimidate. What happened next was so fast I could barely follow it in one fluid motion. Jessica stepped forward, her right hand striking Doug's wrist while her left gripped his elbow. The gun clattered to the ground as she continued the movement, twisting his arm behind his back and taking him to the ground with professional precision. Doug's face registered shock as he found himself immobilized face down on the porch, Jessica's knee maintaining pressure on his back while she secured his wrists. Michael, she said calmly, could you pick up the weapon carefully by the grip, using your shirt to avoid disturbing fingerprints? Michael complied, his expression a mixture of shock and admiration. And Mrs. Mitchell, Jessica continued, nodding to me where I stood frozen at the edge of the lawn. Perfect timing. Could you please inform the responding officers that we have an armed suspect detained? The police arrived moments later, taking in the scene with professional caution. Jessica identified herself as FBI, showing credentials I hadn't even realized she was carrying the officer's demeanor. Changed immediately, becoming more deferential as they took custody of Doug and secured the weapon. This man discharged a firearm in a residential area while threatening civilians, Jessica explained, her tone now fully professional. The weapon appears to be carried without a valid permit based on information we've received from federal sources. She gave a concise statement about what she had witnessed, and the officers seemed grateful for her clear law enforcement-style report. As Doug was being placed in the police car, Richard Connor screeched to a halt at the curb, rushing toward the scene. What's going on? Here, Doug works for me for the HOA. Whatever happened must be a misunderstanding. The lead officer blocked his approach, so step back. This man discharged a firearm during a threatening confrontation and is being arrested for multiple weapons violations and assault charges. Richard's face contorted with rage and disbelief. This is ridiculous. You can't arrest our security officer for doing his job. Who made these accusations? His eyes landed on me, then Jessica, then Michael. I'll have your badges for this harassment. The officer was unimpressed, sir, unless you want to join him for interfering with an arrest. I suggest you step back now. As Richard was forced to watch Doug being driven away, he brushed past Jessica with a threatening whisper. You've made a serious mistake. You have no idea who we are or what we can do. Jessica's response was a calm smile. Funny, that's exactly what I was about to say to you. Richard's retaliation was swift and calculated. The next morning, our mailbox was stuffed with violation notices, 17 in total, ranging from unapproved landscape modifications. The red X Doug himself had painted to unauthorized security equipment. Our cameras each carried a minimum fine of $100 that night. Someone destroyed the flowers in our front garden, pulling plants from the ground and leaving them strewn across the lawn. The security footage showed two teenagers doing the damage, but their faces were covered, and they were careful to avoid clear views of the cameras. The message was clear. Richard had resources beyond just Doug, and he wasn't backing down. Meanwhile, Agent Thomas informed Jessica that the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had accelerated their investigation into the Oakwood Estates HOA based on the information we'd provided. We've been building a case against several coordinated HOA fraud schemes in the region. Richard Connor's operation appears to be one node in a larger network. The physical intimidation and weapons charges add significant weight to what was previously just a financial investigation. Heron continued providing inside information, delivering copies of financial records showing nearly $500,000 diverted from HOA funds through fake service contracts to companies owned by Richard's relatives. Sarah organized a meeting of concerned homeowners at a restaurant outside the neighborhood to avoid HOA surveillance. 23 residents attended, many sharing similar stories of harassment, selective enforcement, and mysterious property damage. After questioning Richard's leadership together, they formed the Fair Homeowners Alliance and drafted a petition demanding a special election to replace the current board. Karen, still maintaining her cover as Richard's loyal secretary, informed us that Richard was furious about the growing opposition. He scheduled an emergency HOA meeting, placing membership termination procedures prominently on the agenda, a thinly veiled threat to have me expelled from the community. The emergency meeting was held on a Tuesday evening. Jessica and I arrived to find the room packed, with Richard, 3 board members, and their attorneys seated at the front table. Doug's absence was conspicuous. He'd been released on bail but ordered to stay away from the neighborhood. Richard called the meeting to order with barely contained anger. We're facing an organized effort to undermine the standards that make Oakwood Estates the premier community in this region. Certain new residents, his glare fixed on me, have demonstrated blatant disregard for our rules and have incited others to join their disruptive behavior. He turned to his attorney. Mr. Brennan will outline the board's authority to terminate membership for residents who pose a threat to community standards. I had come prepared with my own legal colleague, Patricia Reyes, an HOA specialist who had battled Richard's type before. When Richard tried to prevent me from speaking, multiple residents stood up in protest. "Let her speak," Michael called, outbacked by a chorus of agreement. Richard's face darkened as he realized he'd lost control of the room. I approached the microphone, laying out evidence of financial mismanagement, selective enforcement, and the pattern of targeting specific property I didn't reveal. Everything we knew, saving key evidence for potential legal proceedings, but presented enough to make it clear. This wasn't just a personal grievance. The atmosphere shifted dramatically when Karen unexpectedly stood up from her secretary position. Everything Mrs. Mitchell has said is true. I have documents proving the financial irregularities. Richard's face went from red to white in seconds. Karen, sit down. You're out of order. But Karen continued. Gaining strength, I've witnessed board members intimidating residents, falsifying violation records, and misappropriating funds for years. I've kept records and copies of everything. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Richard, losing all pretense of control, shouted above. The noise this meeting is. Adjourned, everyone leave now, but no one moved instead. Linda Thompson stood up. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board, as permitted under Article 8 of our bylaws. During any official meeting with quorum present, Richard stormed out of the meeting shouting that everyone will regret this. As he slammed the door, the remaining board members, seeing the unified opposition, claiming that they had been unaware of his actions, the membership voted overwhelmingly to remove the entire board and schedule proper elections. As Jessica and I drove home, we felt cautiously victorious, but knew Richard wouldn't surrender his power without a final fight, though he's cornered now, Jessica warned. That makes him more dangerous than ever. Her words proved prophetic when we arrived home. The front door lock had been broken from the darkness. Inside, Richard's voice called out, "We need to talk privately." And this time, no one's calling the police. My heart pounded as Jessica motioned for me to stay behind her, her right hand instinctively reaching toward her hip, where her service weapon would normally be, but she was off-duty unarmed. "Richard," she called calmly into the darkened house. Breaking and entering is a federal crime. Add that to brandishing a weapon, and you're looking at serious time. A harsh laugh came from our living room and closed the door. I know who you are now, Jessica Mitchell. My friends at the police department ran your name. After yesterday's incident, FBI tactical. Quite impressive, but even federal agents need to sleep, and accidents happen to everyone. We entered cautiously to find Richard seated in my favorite armchair, a handgun resting casually on his knee. Jessica assessed the situation with a quick glance, noting exits, positions, distances before focusing on Richard himself. What's your end game here, Richard? You've already lost control of the HOA. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has been investigating you for months. Walking away now with what you've already skimmed would be your smartest move. I noticed Jessica subtly pressing something in her pocket, activating her phone's recording function and the hidden security cameras we'd installed. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes, very direct. Agent Mitchell, I appreciate that, so I'll be direct too. I have this. He held up a thick document with one hand keeping the gun steady, with the other a complete retraction of all accusations signed by both of you, accompanied by your immediate notice to sell your property. In return, I'm prepared to be generous, $50,000 above your purchase price sign. Now we all move on with our lives. Refuse. He gestured with the gun and things get complicated. Jessica tilted her head. Curiously, that's your solution, more threats? You realize that's what got you into this mess in the first place. For the next 20 minutes, Jessica masterfully kept Richard talking about his plans, his grievances, his sense of entitlement to control, the neighborhood she led him through, a conversation that systematically extracted confessions to multiple crimes, all while appearing merely to be negotiating. So let me understand this correctly, she said. At one point, you and your brother-in-law's investment firm have been targeting specific properties because they complete a development block that will be worth 3 times as much after rezoning. Richard, feeling in control with his weapon, became increasingly boastful about the scheme. He would be thankful to do the work for her 34 properties, acquired over 3 years, most at 20 to 30% below market value. Once the commercial rezoning goes through next month, we'll clear $7 million in profit. Minimum. The fools who sold never even realized what was coming. As Richard continued revealing details, the shell companies, the kickbacks to city planning officials, the coordination with other HOAs in the region. I watched Jessica patiently building a comprehensive confession. When she asked about Doug's an idiot, useful for scaring old ladies and placing violation notices, he'll take the weapons charges and keep his mouth shut if he knows what's good for him. I've got enough dirt on half the police department to ensure this all goes away. Jessica nodded sympathetically. It must be frustrating, Dealing with incompetent help, is that why you decided to handle us personally? Richard's ego couldn't resist the bait. Some situations require a personal touch. Your mother was becoming a rallying point for the malcontents, you proved. Unexpectedly resourceful together, you threatened 3 years of careful planning. Sometimes you need to remove obstacles. Decisively, Richard finally lost patience with the conversation enough talk sign. The documents now, or I'll make this look like a tragic home invasion gone wrong. He raised the gun directly at me. Your daughter might be FBI, but even she can't move faster than a bullet. Jessica remained unnervingly calm before you. Pull that trigger, Richard, you should know. 2 things first. That gun you're holding has been reported stolen from the police evidence room 3 years ago. Part of why you retired early. I'm guessing second, this entire conversation has been transmitted live to my colleague, Agent Thomas Davis, who is currently parked down the street with a tactical team. Richard's momentary confusion gave Jessica the opening she needed. With explosive speed, she executed a perfect disarming technique, stepping inside. His aim, while controlling his wrist, removing the gun from his grasp. Before he could react in the same fluid movement, she twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him face down onto the floor. Richard Connors, you're under arrest for breaking and entering attempted extortion, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and about a dozen other charges. We'll sort out later. The front door burst open and Agent Thomas entered, with 4 FBI agents in tactical gear, weapons drawn. Perfect timing, Jessica said, not even slightly out of breath, as she maintained her hold on Richard. Our friend here has been quite informative. Richard's face contorted with shock and rage as he was handcuffed. You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I have friends. Jessica cut him off. In the police department, the DA's office, city planning. Yes, we know they're all being investigated too. Financial Crimes Task Force has been watching your entire network for months. Your HOA scam was just the tip of the iceberg that led us to a much bigger operation. Thomas nodded respectfully to Jessica as his team secured Richard. Commander Mitchell, any further instructions? Richard's eyes widened at the title commander. Jessica smiled slightly. Special Tactical Operations, Commander, FBI, Chicago Field Office, and you just threatened my mother at gunpoint. Not your smartest move. Richard, 1 week later, our backyard was filled with neighbors for an impromptu community barbecue. The news of Richard and Doug's arrests had spread quickly, along with details of the larger investigation into HOA fraud schemes across the county. Linda had been elected interim HOA president, with Karen serving as treasurer and Michael heading a newly formed transparency committee. The atmosphere was celebratory but also cathartic. Many residents shared stories of intimidation they'd previously been too frightened to discuss. I can't believe we put up with it for so long, one elderly gentleman told me, shaking his head. We were all so isolated, thinking we were the only ones being targeted. Divide and conquer, it's an old tactic. Jessica was helping serve drinks, looking relaxed and at home among our neighbors. She had extended her leave to help reorganize the HOA, with proper checks and balances, drawing on her FBI experience with organizational structures. I've officially requested a transfer to the Chicago field office, she told me quietly as we watched the children playing on the newly restored lawn. This whole experience made me realize I've been too far from family. Besides, there's clearly work to be done here. The real estate fraud investigation is expanding, and I want to see it through. I couldn't have been happier about this development, though. I worried about the higher risk assignments she sometimes took. Reading my expression, she squeezed my hand. Don't worry, Mom. Most of my work will be organizational and investigative. The tactical team is just one part of what I do. News of the Oakwood Estates case had caught the attention of national media, highlighting the growing problem of HOA abuse and real estate fraud schemes using homeowners associations as vehicles. Several investigative reporters had contacted me for interviews, and a state senator had reached out about strengthening legislation around HOA governance and transparency. I had agreed to serve as legal consultant for the new HOA board, helping rewrite the covenant to remove unenforceable provisions and establish clear rights for homeowners. The victory felt important beyond just our neighborhood, a small but significant pushback against the abuse of power that can happen in even the most ordinary settings. 3 months later, I sat in the courtroom as Richard and Doug faced a judge for sentencing. The prosecution had built an airtight case bolstered by Karen's meticulous records, the recorded confession from our living room, and financial documentation uncovered by the FBI. Investigation. Richard had tried desperately to implicate others and reduce his own culpability, but the evidence was overwhelming his attempts to intimidate. Witnesses from jail had only added to his charges. Jessica testified in her full FBI uniform, her professional demeanor and commanding presence leaving no doubt about the seriousness of Richard's threats against us. The judge was unsparing in her assessment. Mr. Connors, you abused a position of neighborhood trust to orchestrate a sophisticated fraud scheme using intimidation and threats of violence against the very homeowners you were elected to represent. Your actions show a disturbing pattern of escalation that culminated in armed home invasion. Richard stared straight ahead, his former arrogance replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his life collapse. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison for the combined charges plus full financial restitution to the Homeowners Association and affected residents. Doug received 8 years for his role with the judge, noting his cooperation had earned him some leniency. As we left the courthouse, a reporter asked how it felt to take down an HOA tyrant. I thought about the fear I'd felt when Richard broke into our home, the anger when Doug vandalized our property, and the gradual relief as neighbors united against their bullying. It feels like remembering that even small injustices matter, I replied, and that standing up to them sometimes requires a community, not just an individual, Jessica added with a smile, and sometimes it requires knowing when you're pointing a gun at the wrong person's mother. Back in Oakwood Estates, life had transformed. The newly elected HOA board operated with unprecedented transparency, posting all financial records online and holding open meetings. The previously intimidated residents had found their voices, creating a vibrant community that actually delivered on the promise of neighbors becoming family. On our front lawn, where Doug had once spray painted his threatening red X, we placed a small humorous sign: this area protected by FBI. Think twice before pointing guns. It always made visitors laugh, but for us it represented something profound about standing up to bullies, regardless of what official-looking uniforms they might wear sometimes to handle a bully. All you need is a determined mother, a daughter with specialized skills, and a community that finally refuses to be afraid, and perhaps a bit of luck when the bad guys are foolish enough to point a gun at exactly the wrong. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this wild ride into HOA chaos and justice served. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the little battles we fight aren't just about lawns, fences, or parking spots. They're about standing up for what's right, no matter how small the issue might seem at first. If you loved watching this as much as we enjoyed telling it, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps us bring you more epic tales of underdogs taking down the overreach of power. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next showdown. Got your own HOA nightmare or a story of sweet neighborhood revenge? Drop it in the comments. We might just feature it in a future episode. Remember, every community has its bullies, but every bully eventually meets someone who pushes back harder. Stay strong, stay smart, and never underestimate the power of persistence. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next story.